Have you had a good day? All right, go G1 Global. And I mean, wow, I mean, what a topic, right? So evolution, humans, AI, so should we have an engineer? Should we have, a business person? Should we have an investor? I mean, God, it's such a huge topic. So I wanted to start and sort of slide in because we've got a minister of the cabinet here, Asao Sensei. So you managed to become a minister without the help of AI. Tell us a little bit about your personal story. How long have you been a politician and how did you get here?
All right, okay. The first election that I ran was back in 1996, so quite some time ago. And there's a interesting story about life in there. That's I have entered a bank called IBJ, Industrial Bank of Japan, in 1987, and a person who entered IBJ, Industrial Bank of Japan, 1 year later was working in the same department as myself, and I went to Stanford Business School in 1990 and obtained an MBA in 1992. This person obtained his MBA from the same school that Hori-san went in 1993. As I said, I left IBJ in October of 1995, and he left November of 1995. So here comes the question. In life, you have to choose where you want. I chose the political arena. This person chose business arena. Do you know what's the difference between political arena and business arena? That is, if you go to political arena, you can never IPO, or you have to face election every time, which means that you have to go IPO several times, several years, once in several years. But so there's the other person who was working in the same department as I, went to business arena. So he just he made his company public, and now he's one of the richest person in Japan. So if you are to choose from now in your life, you have to really think about not relying on AI, but relying on what do you feel. And so if you really want to change the Japan as a whole, you should go to political arena. But and also if you want to change Japan in your own business sector, you should choose business sector. And so that's life.
So there you go, a little life lesson here for our own personal LLMs that we're all doing here. Very quickly, since we've got you, before we go into the big issues, and Gillian, I've got my eyes on you. You're going to lead the discussion as an anthropologist, right, into human evolution and AI. But before we go there, just very quickly, since we do have a minister sitting on the stage here, how's it going with that new cabinet?
Oh, well, it's going well. Well, first of all, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Japanese politics. Former Prime Minister Kishida said that he will not run for the coming presidential election of LDP, Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, in August the 14th. And I don't know whether AI predicted this, or I don't think so. But since then, the election for the leadership of LDP happened. And Ishiba-san won this presidential election, and he was nominated as the prime minister on October the 1st, and he called for general election in October the 9th. So now we are facing election from tomorrow, but basically this whole election started in the midst of August, so to say. And last but not least, I have to tell you that the economy, I think Jesper would agree, has now of Japan is much better than some times ago. And also in this August September, maybe starting from July, the real wage the increase of real wage is bigger than the inflation rate. And so, in other words, the real wage is plus. So the economy is good. I think the question is, for the general election at least, is how can we continue this path? And to continue this path, the only way is to raise productivity. And to raise productivity, AI is, has a very big effect on. And also, as a Minister of Environment, to begin this topic, AI uses a lot of electricity, so this could be a bottleneck facing the global warming challenge. So that's, I think, as an opening remark, I think that's enough.
That's a wonderful opening remark. I actually had a thing with one of my journalist friends from one of the big TV stations. I said, look, Ishiba is going to give this, the new prime minister will give this policy speech. So why don't you just do your chat GPT AI thing and say, write a policy speech based on what we know about Mr. Ishiba, right? He got everything wrong, because Mr. Ishiba just is a maverick and does whatever he does. So, Gillian, thank you for joining us. It's early in London. Are you in London?
I'm actually in New York.
You're actually in New York. Okay, well I think as a Londoner, is that mandatory now? Are you part of Brexit?
No. I'm normally in London. I have two roles. In addition to being a columnist with the Financial Times, I also am provost of King's College in Cambridge. And so I'm normally in Britain at this time of year, but I'm just come over here for a couple of days to New York.
Aha, fundraising for King's College. This is what the Americans are good for. You go fundraising there. Sorry, Gillian, on a serious note, there's been, sort of a huge amount of excitement, not just about AI, which, we'll talk about, we'll pivot into it, but obviously the other area of global excitement has been Japan. Can you sort of, you've lived here for, a good part, of your life during the 1990s. Tell me a little bit about sort of what, your impression is. Why is there this Japan revival now?
Well, I have 3 points to make. And let me start by saying that it is a great pleasure and honor to be participating in this event today. I love Japan dearly and lived there for many years and always love to come back. And I will be back again early next year. But the 3 points I have to make is that firstly, as you say, Jesper, the attitudes towards Japan have changed quite considerably in the last year or two. When I was working as a correspondent in Tokyo, running the Financial Times Bureau, people would talk a lot about the so-called Japan passing problem, because foreign investors and diplomats and journalists would come to Japan if they came at all and then go straight to China because China was hot, hot, hot. We're talking 15, 20 years ago. Now, Japan is very much the focus for many Western business people, technologists, media, because Japan is seen as both a counterweight to China, but also an increasingly interesting and notable economy and potentially political force on the world stage in its own right. And that leads to a second point, which is that in many ways, Japan has a lot to say about the key themes of this conference, which is technology and AI. And the reason is that ever since I worked in Japan in the 1990s, I've been very struck that Japan has a subtly different attitude towards this from America or Europe. And unfortunately, America and Europe has dominated the debate. And I really wish that Japan's voice was louder. And the reason is that robots in America and Europe have long been seen as something quite terrifying, partly because popular culture, things like Star Trek or Doctor Who or 2000 AD, have presented robots in a very negative way. However, I've always been struck that my friends in Japan, really from 25 years ago, have been much more positive towards robots and technology and now artificial intelligence. And I think that's partly because of different demographic situations. Japan needs tech to essentially offset the shortage of labor. I think it's also perhaps because Japanese popular culture has long been more positive towards technology and robots and AI. Things like Astro Boy had a really big cultural impact in shaping attitudes. And it's a stark contrast to the kind of material in America during that era. But I think the third reason, which is quite interesting to think about, is that Western Christian culture, which is still very much feeding into American cultural perspectives on AI, draws a very strict line between animate and inanimate objects, things that are alive and things that are not alive. Whereas, of course, the Japanese Shinto tradition has got a much more subtle vision of what life is. And, rocks can be alive, trees can be alive. The idea of a soul, an idea of having life, is a much broader perspective than in much of the narrow Western Christian tradition. And I think those subtle shifts have created quite a subtly different attitude towards AI that's much more positive and sees AI more as a friend and supporter and helpmeet for human beings rather than just an evil threat that's going to replace humans or wipe them out. And that leads me to my third point, which is that because of that different attitude, and that's been baked into how devices are being designed in Japan, I do think it's very important for Japan to stand up and have its voice on the world stage now around AI, and maybe to try and redefine what artificial intelligence is and call it augmented intelligence, a different type of AI, and champion the concept of augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, as where we should be going in the future. And that's really my vision of how humans and AI can both adapt and evolve and go forward in a positive way.
No, excellent. And I'm so glad that you jump right in, the true evolutionary challenges. I mean, there's engineering challenges, there's environmental challenges, et cetera, but the sort of, fundamental challenge of man versus machine, right? Of a sentient being that creates itself, right? Or one that is created by humankind, this is very exciting. So, Professor, you're at the sharp end of the business world here. My friends always say, it's like, no, AI is not going to take your job. It's going to be somebody who knows how to use AI better than you do, who's going to take my job.
First off, thank you for having me. I happened to be in Singapore last week, and so this year when I got Hori-san's invitation to come and join G1, I was delighted to say yes, I can actually be there in person. It's kind of ironical that Gillian, you're in New York while I'm sitting here. But I do actually agree with a lot of what has already been said. From the environmental challenges that AI is going to pose, that the minister brought up, that we are, that we'll get to many of the points that Gillian raised, the more fluid acceptance of robots in society here, the more fluid lines between, machine and human. And I think that that's something where the rest of the world is going to have to follow Japan to learn how to sort of be more embracing of, these blurring lines. There are two things on my mind when I hear the question about AI and work, about, what is the future? I'm generally an optimist about technology. I've spent my entire career studying technological change, but I believe that optimism is best sort of realized if it comes with a healthy dose of caution. I think, and the two notes that, I want to strike here, one has to do with the fact that, yes, the idea that a machine is going to replace you is a flawed way to think about AI-enabled automation. We will invent new ways of organizing work. Humans will augment machines, machines will augment humans. this replacement idea is not the right lens through which to be looking at things. However, it also does mean that a significant fraction of the world's workforce is going to need a new occupation. There will be work for humans, it just won't be the work that we're doing today. And this isn't just about, people graduating from college having different jobs. A double-digit percentage of the workforce in countries like Japan, Western European countries, the United States, the UK, will have to switch occupations mid-career. Our grandparents held the same job their entire career. Our parents, or I tell my undergrads, your parents sort of held many jobs over their career, but in the same occupation, and you're going to have to switch occupations. And, I was listening to this panel, this wonderful panel right before this one in this room about upskilling, and there were some really interesting insights there. But I think a point that we have to consider is that skills are only a part of the transition. I've been a university professor my entire career. Very different from politics, very different from business. I have to IPO every time I go to class, sort of reestablish my value.
You're doing all right.
Yeah,
it's okay. You're fine.
Yeah, I'm sort of slightly jet lagged, so blame anything that I didn't mean to say on that. No, but I guess the point I'm getting to is that the product that the university sells is not just skills. It's not just what I teach in the classroom. It's a bundle, right? There's credentialing, there's a rite of passage, there's networking, there's learning how to learn, there's talent discovery through clubs, there's how do you get a job, there's confidence building. All of this, we've done an incredible job of creating this package for early career transitions from high school to your first job. We don't have anything comparable for someone who's in their mid-30s, sort of has kids, can't take 4 years off and go back to school. And I think the imperative for education in the 21st century should not be strengthening our flagship universities anymore. It should be investing heavily in robust and holistic mid-career transition. So that's sort of my first point about AI and work. Second point's more futuristic. I programmed expert systems when I was an undergraduate, which I'm sort of dating myself a little for those of you who know, the history of AI. So it's been a part of me, technology, AI, for many years, many years. And so I followed with fascination the new capabilities of, GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, Gemini, all these, generative AI systems. But one of the things we don't think about too much is that while these are general purpose generative systems, they can be adapted to replicate the creative process or the human capital of specific individuals. We've seen this happen in music, in art, in writing. You can write a poem in the style of Shakespeare, can create something that produces music like Taylor Swift, art in the form of Picasso. But it's broader than that now. There are robotic technologies emerging that can replicate the skill of the best surgeon. There are foundry workers whose movements are being recorded to create, machines that, in some ways, I don't want to say extract, but that take out the creative process, the production process. You can do this with sales executives, business development executives, the tone, timing of emails, what to say to close the deal. And my fear is that, current intellectual property law has not imagined this possibility. What is protected is the work, not the process, the impression, not the style. And if humans, our identity is tied very closely to us as productive beings and creative beings. From the time of Hume, there's been this connection, right, between us and the fruits of our labor. And so, on the one hand, we don't want to reduce incentives for people to continue to create. We don't want to lose that part of our identity of us as productive and creative beings. And even in the most dystopian sort of world, think of a matrix-like world where, sort of an intellectual matrix-like world where the only purpose of human data generation is to train the next generation of AI. There's a literature now on model collapse that shows that AI systems perform very poorly if they are trained on data from other AI systems. And so at the very minimum, we need to incent humans to generate enough training data for the next set of AI. And I think that this is something that, how we handle this issue of intellectual autonomy, of human capital ownership, is going to shape the evolution of that human AI melding, and is also going to be a huge determinant of the future of work and of whether AI is going to end up leading to a lot of inequality or a lot much greater opportunity. When you give a professor a mic, they speak for a long time, so I'll stop now.
But you're doing fine. So somebody famous once said, good artists steal, right? No,
Yes.
Good artists copy, great artists steal, right? So is AI the ultimate thief? Gillian, from with your anthropology background, maybe sort of authorship, authenticity, worth of human creation. Any thoughts on that and the interaction with AI?
Well, my thoughts about this have actually changed because, in fact, the way I've looked at AI has turned out to be wrong. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Anthrovision about cultural anthropology, where I tried to look at what it meant to be human and was arguing that essentially artificial intelligence needs anthropology intelligence to create the type of augmented intelligence that I've been talking about. And by that I mean is you need the technical, brilliant coding skills plus an awareness of the human condition to actually create effective AI. And as an example of that, I used to say that there was one job in the world that would always be protected from AI, and that was the job of a comedian, because I thought that humor was something which was so intrinsic to human culture that it was it would be too hard for an AI system to replicate. Because comedy is all about the tribal behavior of humans. You're either in the group that understands the joke or you're not. And what makes jokes funny tends to be cultural contradictions. And above all else, essentially references to things we don't talk about, what I call social silence, all the uncomfortable truths in our life that we like to ignore. And the problem with old-fashioned AI systems was that they used to basically assume that human beings were logical, and they used to collect data on what we said and did, i.e. the noise in our life, not the silence. So I thought AI couldn't possibly create good jokes. And it turns out that I was wrong, because in fact what's happened is that as the whole Transformers technology has improved, and as AI has moved from basically looking for pattern matching and some kind of logical behavior to much more simply observing what humans do and statistically predicting it, it has been able to create jokes which are quite often quite funny. And the crucial thing that I fail to understand is that when human comedians write jokes, they're only funny usually half the time. And so if AI systems are only producing jokes that are funny half the time, it's actually not that much worse than human comedians. However, the crucial point is this. If you look at how human comedians actually write jokes for comedy shows or television shows, they very rarely operate as one person, isolated as a creative person. They tend to operate in teams, and they tend to bounce ideas back and forth and create jokes, reject some, keep going. And what's happening today in television comedy writing in America, I don't know about Japan, is that some comedians are starting to introduce AI tools as one part of the team for comedy writing. So one source of inspiration, one way to bounce ideas back and forth. And to my mind, that illustrates the point about augmented intelligence, that if you start seeing robotics as simply one part of a creative process or intellectual process, with a human still there at some point, but essentially working alongside AI, it changes the debate considerably. And when it comes to things like intellectual property, that again, as you just heard, creates really interesting new questions about what IP is in this new world. But it also means that we have to start evolving and seeing AI as something we need to work with, not against.
You've given me an idea for a new research paper. I'm going to go back to New York and study whether ChatGPT's humor is more like American humor or more British.
I can give you lots of references to research that's being done there, but I can also point you to the comedy clubs in Brooklyn, where there actually is a comedy troupe. That's two comedy troupes who are doing precisely this, and they have roasts, which are basically competitions between AI and humans to try and illustrate this. So when you come back to New York, go to the comedy clubs in Brooklyn and see what you think.
All right.
Well, Gillian, fantastic, and I love this new Turing test. It's not your IQ, but it's your humor. That's going to define whether you are, sentient or not. In the interest of time, I just want to pivot one other direction and bring Japan a little bit into play. Obviously Japan, did not, invent and did not scale up any of the AI tools that are being used in the world right now. But Japan actually plays a very, very important role in, the real problems, which are hardware problems, which are very analog problems. We talked a little bit about energy. It's interesting, in the United States of America now, 15% of all energy is consumed by data centers. In the state of Virginia, it's almost 1/3 of all energy is consumed, is sucked up, as it were, by data centers, not by you and I trying to draw a hot bath. So it's interesting, and we've obviously seen, some companies now buying nuclear power plants, right, in order to fuel these data centers there. But Sensei, you're at the cutting edge, not about the energy, which is a different session, right? But tell me a little bit about Japan's role, right, in overcoming some of the hardware and analog problems.
All right. Well, just to begin, I love Gillian's point about comedians, and if you use AI for comedians process, that means that there's a lot of calculation. And that consumes a lot of electricity. Now, here's where we can come in. I don't know how many of you are aware of that Japan is a leading country in fiber optics, photonics, I should say. In other words, if you use LED electricity instead of the conventional one. If you LED consumes only about 1/100th of electricity. Now, NTT, Japanese cell phone company, has come out with this new technology that could combine between semiconductors with fiber optics. And if you can imagine a data center consuming less electricity, we have discussed that data centers consume a lot of electricity, but that's not just for the calculation. They use a lot of electricity to cool down the servers. And if the signal between semiconductors will be shifted from electricity to fiber optics, then the consumption will be 1/100th, as in the LED light bulb consumes. And this technology now, and NTT do have this technology. Another breakthrough is if we can come out or to change the chip itself from electricity to fiber optics, then this will this means that the consumption of electricity is much less, and this could help at least in combating global warming as well. So this could be an opener for the global warming problem as well. And the productivity only comes out with a breakthrough of technology, and if there's a need, if there's a big demand, this technology should. The point is that at the same time, we have to monetize this technology. But this could help the global society as well. And also, Japan could contribute contributed a lot in that sense. And one last point is that this is I have talked with NTT specialists, but they haven't come out with that. But as Jesper said, hardware currently is the bottleneck in AI. Because software develops a lot. But if you, I'm not a specialist, by the way, in developing softwares, but software basically is 0 to 1. You know, it's if electricity goes, it could be 1. If it stops, it's 0. So it's how should I say, binary. Now, if you think about light has blue, red, and yellow, I think, as the basic color. So it's a 2 cube. So the software development itself can be changed. It's a game. It could be a game changer. And if we can come out with a new software in this sense, I think we can also contribute to a lot in this AI.
Yeah, I've had so many conversations about tech policy with politicians. Nobody has ever sort of educated me about the difference between electricity-based semiconductors and light-based semiconductors. I don't think the word binary has ever come up, but just to sort of build on a couple of those points, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, like in the PC era, like, you know, value was captured by software. This led to Microsoft and giants like them where hardware was commoditized. I mean, today the most valuable AI company in the world is a hardware company, right? NVIDIA. Japan and the Netherlands have assumed greater importance because ASML, which makes equipment that manufactures semiconductors, is in the Netherlands. Tokyo Electron is here. There's a tremendous amount, there's a depth of talent in Japan. In robotics, I don't think there's any dispute that the deepest sort of robotics talent in the world is in Japan. And this matters because the next phase of generative AI is going to be what are called world models. Just like an LLM predicts text and a drug-generating generative AI predicts molecule structures and protein structures by constructing them from their elements and learning the rules of how these are put together. These world models are trying to predict the evolution of physical space. Sort of like when you're driving, you're not making instantaneous decisions. You're looking at the intersection, you see a kid starting to walk, you're making a prediction about how space is going to look in a couple of seconds. So the current generation of self-driving technologies are trying to create these, if the world looks like this today, how will it look like in a couple of seconds? This is fundamentally a problem where robotics talent, I mean, it's far more difficult than language. But it's sort of a space that nobody owns yet, and Japan could certainly own the space. And just one final point about inequality, because I think a lot of people worry about AI being developed by certain countries and not other countries. I don't think that they take into account the fact that the big bottleneck isn't going to be scientific talent or even maybe access to hardware. It's going to be access to electricity, to clean electricity. You take a country like India, they've certainly got a huge amount of tech talent, but a significant fraction of the population doesn't have electricity in the home. So if the government starts to divert big fractions of power generation towards building data centers, the political pushback would be a lot stronger there than it is, say, in China or Japan or in the United States. And so, as countries are thinking about being sovereign about their AI, they're all signing big contracts with NVIDIA for these GPUs. But what they really should be thinking about is, is infrastructure really what I should be focusing on? Or should I let some of these other people sort of, burn the electricity to create the infrastructure? And should I instead focus on applications and talent instead for my strategic autonomy?
So excellent. So we've covered quite a bit of ground. I want to make one last pivot before we go into Q&A, and I've extended the Q&A session to 20 minutes. So please prepare your questions here. But I want to talk about ethics. This is all nice. This is all good. And so we create a better world, and with a little luck, Japan will create photonics that will take away the energy need, etc., etc. What about the bad stuff? What about, the evil actors that are going to create, the thing that cracks my bank account, et cetera, et cetera? Any thoughts on how, from a policy perspective, how do we think, about the ethics, and, the potential threat, right, to human democracy and human society, as a result of AI? Any thoughts? Sensei, you're in the cabinet, remember? For the moment.
Well, that's a very good question. Of course, AI is what we don't have. What we are really experiencing right now. So it will be very difficult to really write down all of the negative side right now because we don't know what will happen. But one thing I think is that I think countries have different phase in its development. Just as you said, that India may have shortage of electricity. So would this create, would this enhance the differences between countries or differences within countries? People who have a lot of money, I don't know how, but may be able to use this AI for his own thing. And for those who don't have money, may not. But of course, we don't know yet. So I think we have to. And one other thing that I wanted to put in is that AI, one bottleneck, just aside from electricity, is that if you don't know what you're doing, you can't use AI. In other words, if you're a manager and if you have a human working for you, you will ask, if you're a good manager, you will ask he or her to collect these kind of information. AI, a good manager could use AI to enhance his process, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can't use AI. So I think this might not answer your question, but maybe the negative side is we have to teach each individual that to use AI properly. In other words, you have to know what you're doing.
So it's very funny. I was at the Keiichiro a couple of months ago, and they asked, what should we do about the threat of AI? And I said, spend $1 trillion on education. Because if you educate human beings in a better way, then the threat obviously is going to be mitigated. Gillian, what about your thoughts on sort of ethics, the need to constrain? What do we do?
Well, I would say that this illustrates the reason I argue that AI as an artificial intelligence needs the anthropology intelligence, the study of human culture, to create effective augmented intelligence, because ethics is absolutely critical and having social acceptance is critical. Many governments have been very, very slow to actually embrace that. I mean, the good news is that some of the tech companies are thinking about the social context of technology and AI. One little known fact is that the second biggest employer of cultural anthropologists in the world today is Microsoft, because they are looking a lot at the interaction between tech and human and social culture. And the reason it matters so much is that people sometimes think of culture as being like a fixed box of things. So you have a bit like a Tupperware box, a plastic box, where you have Japanese culture, American culture, British culture. And it's a natural human tendency to assume that one's own culture is a sealed box at the top of all the other boxes and most important. And that's simply not true. Culture is more like a slow-moving river where we learn from each other all the time and change in response to things like tech innovation. So, tiny example, 4 or 5 years ago, anthropologists at Intel studied different Chinese and American attitudes towards facial recognition systems. And they discovered that the Chinese were very accepting of facial recognition systems, but the Americans 5 years ago thought it was ethically terrible in many contexts. However, fast forward to today, and most Americans use facial recognition systems on their own iPhones without any problems at all. And so the point is that what's considered acceptable changes over time, and what's happening in one market, one country, can actually feed into the global conversation and change our concept of what's acceptable as well.
Just one quick point before we go to Q&A, which is that American culture may come in a Tupperware box, but I think the box that contains Japanese culture probably looks a lot nicer than a Tupperware box.
It's the nicest boxes.
It's important to point out, but the thing
It's
that
not
worries-
sealed.
Yeah, it's your point about educate the world, spend $1 trillion on education makes me think about the worries around misinformation and fake news. This is something that we've known is going to be a problem for almost a decade now. There have been all kinds of centralized government solutions, like platform solutions, and most of us have concluded that the solution is at the edges, that the only way to counter misinformation is to educate people in a way that they're able to tell fake news from real, and that they want to, And the reason why I bring this up is that ever since Meta released its cutting-edge large language model, Llama, the idea that you can regulate AI by constraining access to it is now a fantasy. And so we're in this sort of aggressive phase of having to manage the bad uses of AI because pretty much anyone who wants it is going to have access to it. So anticipatory regulation isn't going to work. We're just going to have to wait and, sort of be vigilant.
But I think, to latch on to Gillian's point, I mean, the amount of human evolution is quite incredible. I mean, remember George Orwell, right? Big Brother, oh my God, the Nazis, Stalin, and all of that stuff. Well, he did not predict that we would all rush to buy our own cameras and that most of us get very angry when nobody watches us. Anyway, sorry. Let's open it up for questions. Anybody, any question? And if you could, remember, we do apply German rules. So any question that goes in over 30 seconds, it's a bottle of champagne for each of the panelists. So please stick to that rule. And also, if you could please tell us who you would like, if you have a preferred one, who you would like the question to answer.
So my question is sort of an extension of what you've talked about. You're going to have multiple careers. There's going to be perhaps tons of displacement. I'm very curious how governments are going to react to that. That seems like it can have profound political effects in democracies. And I'm just curious what people think and how governments can prepare for that potential.
Sensei.
Well, as I said, I think the biggest challenge jobs are the mid-class managers. If you don't know what you're doing, you will be replaced by AI. And so then how to train a manager? It's difficult because the person has to know the process, and if you use AI, the process will be faster, but you will be replaced by. So I think to answer your question, it might be not the government's job, but the government's job may be to create other positions in other areas to work. And you have to be prepared that if you are responsible for certain things, you have to know the process, because then otherwise you'll be out, or you will be replaced by someone who knows the process. I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but that's.
Yeah, just to add to that, I agree. And one concrete thing that governments can do is invest very heavily in infrastructure to transition people. Sort of make that a priority. Nobody got elected by, running on a platform of community colleges. And in some ways, for companies as well, reskilling people and transitioning them out of their companies is seen as a cost rather than as a benefit. But I often tell companies, think about sustainability, think about fair labor practices. 10, 15, 20 years ago, this was corporate social responsibility. Today, it's profit, right? I mean, you're positioning, nobody's going to buy from you if you have unfair labor practices. Companies position themselves as sustainable. So if we can, get some marketing genius to sort of take companies towards a place where in 10 years, consumers reject companies that don't manage workforce transitions well, I think that'll be more powerful than anything that any government can do.
So it's interesting. I, of course, have to do the 30 seconds Japan optimist spiel, right? That Japan obviously has a demographic tailwind, right? Because the labor displacement, by definition, is not the problem. It's labor scarcity that's the problem. So the more you can do to augment the existing labor, right, the better it's going to be. And for us as managers or as leaders of your companies, right, this perpetual learning culture, even at the mid-manager level, right? That's the key cultural change that does have to happen, not just in Japan, but everywhere else in the world. Any additional questions? Hori-san.
Yes, but you mentioned about Keiichiro spend $1 trillion, spend $1 trillion on education. I'd like to ask Gillian or Arun, what kind of education do you think Keiichiro or companies should invest in, and what kind of skills do you think they would need in the future?
Gillian, do you want to go first, or should I?
I actually think Sensei should go first because Sensei is the person who's actually in the middle of it. I'm happy to give my thoughts, but Sensei actually has the ability to.
You're busy querying ChatGPT, are you?
Not at all. No, I mean I can say very briefly. What's going to be needed is dynamic education that both emphasizes the need to have at least a working knowledge of how to work alongside AI and incorporate it, but also the imagination to think about the way that societies are going and jobs are going and technology is going for the future. And it's having that imagination and that creative spark, which is also going to be very, very, very important going forward. And I think that people fret a lot about the so-called digital divide between people who are tech literate or not. That's been the dominant conversation when it comes to questions of equality and policy making around tech, having people who have the literacy of the digitization and those who don't. But I think in the future, it's going to be a three-part digital divide between people who are tech literate, people who are not tech literate, and people who are both tech literate and able to understand how tech interacts with social and cultural processes to imagine how the world might be in the future.
There's certainly, it's not a good idea to invest very deeply in one thing. Like, sort of a lot of my undergrads want to study finance or they want to study computer science. And I say that that's not a good strategy for the future. Broaden your base. I tell everybody to, not just because I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, but I say that entrepreneurial skills are going to be very important because even if you don't start your own company, it's that capability that will give you the nimbleness and the agility to be able to navigate sort of 2 or 3 occupational changes. Critical thinking is another deep investment, and learning how to network. And I tell people that, like I started networking late in life. When I was 19 years old, like my networking was like people I was getting drunk with in college, and that was pretty much it. Now everybody's sort of like, got 500 LinkedIn connections by the time they're 19. But it's about nurturing those connections actively, because as you again go through these transitions, certainly being agile and flexible is helpful, but you're going to rely on your network. And so you have to be able to sort of build and renew this network. And so that's what I tell people to invest in sort of on the education front. It's not any particular thing. It's not data science. It's not computer science. It's not a particular functional learning. Yeah.
My 30 seconds answer is that, you should invest more in education in different, nationalities and different, what you used to call boxes, even though they don't exist, in different cultures, that becomes much, much more important. AI has a danger of making everybody insular because they think that they can learn about Germany from just Googling it on Claude. While when you actually go to Germany, you realize that the beer is actually really good. Sorry, but it's a very serious note. I think humans live in human communities, visit more and live in different communities, to learn how humans actually interact. Any additional questions? Please, there were a couple of them here. If you don't mind, again, 30 seconds rule. I've got your eyes.
I like champagne. I'm not giving it up. So the half-life of technology is accelerating dramatically, right? How should or how are companies and governments thinking about accelerating decision-making cycles?
Excellent. Can we batch a couple of questions? Anybody in particular you want this to be answered for? To general. Okay. Great. Dozo.
Since we have learned that there are two threats for humankind. One is AI. The other one is division between authoritarian states and democratic states. Are there any ways to create the cooperation between authoritarian countries and democratic countries, like a COP29, especially designed for the artificial intelligence?
Fantastic. Anybody else? Hi, Dozo. We've got a cluster.
Do you think the human data creation will be a sustainable and the empowering job, in fact could be a majority of the job? And then the reason is basically like maybe the $1 trillion will be justified to kind of pay if there are a lot of labor is kind of done by the AI plus small number of humans. So humans basically can focus all their energy on learning things that AI cannot do. I personally find that satisfying because I want to do something that AI or humans cannot do. That's always the value creation. And also want my name to be part of the prompt that people keep querying.
Now, one more question, please.
My question is, so how you guys have updated yourselves as a leader of the AI, age of AI?
Very good. Who wants to go first?
Which question?
You pick.
Okay.
You
well, I'll go about authoritarian and democracy. That's a very good question. Of course, we have to agree that global warming is a problem for both sides, that to begin with. And another thing, and also I wanted to say that although Japan and US and most UK, of course, is a democracy, however, if you look at the companies that are succeeding, I don't think all of the companies are democratic. In other words, if you look at the market capitalization or big companies, of course, the late Steve Jobs' wife was a one-year senior at Stanford Business School, but I don't think Steve Jobs is, at least he was a Democrat in his own company. He has that vision, and so this might not be answering your question, but someone who asked about the Japanese economy. We need a leader who might not be as Democrat as the current leadership in some of the Keiichiro companies. So we might have to have people like Hori-san in a lot of the Japanese companies who could come out with big vision. So anyways, to answer how to cope with the global issue, I think we have to understand that this is a issue for both sides. And we have to come out with a good solution.
Gillian, any of the 4 questions you'd like to tackle?
Yeah, 2 quick, rather different points. Firstly, on the issue of authoritarian versus democratic countries collaborating over AI, I mean, the key question really is whether China and the US can collaborate right now. And here there's a rather sort of contradictory, surprising pattern here, because people thought 3 or 4 years ago that climate change would be an area for global collaboration, and AI and tech will be one area where it was impossible to get US and China to talk to each other. In fact, climate change issues have become an area of geostrategic competition, not collaboration, tragically. But actually, there is more interaction between the US and China around the future of potentially setting AI-type rules than you might expect through the United Nations. And there is quite an active debate about whether there should be the creation of something a bit like COP process for AI. And there have been joint reports written by the US and China around this, surprisingly. I'm not wildly optimistic, but it's certainly something to bear in mind. But the second point I find fascinating is speed, because the problem is that democracy takes a long time. It's really messy and time consuming to have to ask everyone what they think and organize a vote. I know that because I'm in a university system at Cambridge University, which is extremely democratic, and nothing gets decided very quickly. And the question really is given the innovation cycle and given the fact that machines can act so much faster than us, how are we going to change our corporate governance structures to speed up in response to that? And I personally happen to think democracy is needed to get social acceptance and for moral reasons, but is there a way to use AI to get faster democratic processes?
That's you know, these are really good points. I mean, of the democracies that move slowly, you've got the United States, right, where it's almost impossible to get any legislation passed now. And so the only way in which we are regulating AI is through executive orders, through like that little authoritarian sliver of like, you know, sort of the democratic process. I'll try and address some of the other questions since I know the least about authoritarian governments in the room. You know, on the half-life of technology, one of the things that I think I tell companies is to skip a couple of generations along the way, not just because it allows them to, you know, sort of take a deep breath and figure out if what they have is actually working, but there are often hidden fault lines in these new large language models, in these new technologies. And, you know, sometimes it helps to not just sort of jump onto GPT-01 because it happens to be the latest thing, because my research shows, for example, that it fails miserably at trusting behavior. All of a sudden something. So skip a couple of generations. On the sort of the what will humans do question in some sense. I like that future as well. I mean, but I also reflect on the fact that what I do for work wasn't considered work a couple of 100 years ago. It was considered leisure. And so there may be things that we do in the future that we do as work that we haven't imagined our work yet, which could include like lending our names to sort of famous prompts or like, you know, sort of getting royalties of our image being played in a video game. So I'm not worried that humans have run out of things to do. I think every generation that sees technological shocks worries, what will the humans do? And, you know, so long as there are unfulfilled human aspirations, the economy will grow and human beings will have things to do. What have I done to prepare myself? I have spent so much time over the last 2 years just keeping up with generative AI technology. That just happens to be my area, but like I probably work 5 hours a week more than I used to before 2022, just because it takes a long time to just sort of keep up. So I'm learning.
So now we've got the explanation of the productivity conundrum.
Yes.
Yes, AI will boost productivity, but we all have to study so hard, you know, that we put in more labor, and so as a result, productivity doesn't grow. Interesting little topic. We've run out of time. Gillian, you've been a fantastic panel. You know, thank you very much. It was a little bit all over, fully aware of that. But that's what happens when you go from artificial to augmented to human technology. What I personally do to prepare is I read the classics. I find that what the Greeks had to offer in terms of the human condition, the human tragedy, and Gillian, the human comedy, you know, there's a lot to offer that ChatGPT does not offer. Thank you very, very much. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.